Hello, everyone, and welcome to this milestone, the 25th Miami Jewish Film Festival, the world's largest festival of its kind. We want to thank all of our members, sponsors, community partners, all of you film lovers, and especially our presenting sponsors, the Center for Advancement of Jewish Education, known as SAGE, and the Greater Miami Jewish Federation for their continued support throughout all these years. My name is Judge Scott Bernstein. I'm excited to be here today moderating a virtual conversation with the directors Władek Jurkow Gerburg Rohde-Dahl and historian Johannes Schwartz from the movie The Female Guard, which is premiering at this year's festival. Thank you all for joining us. So welcome, everyone. It really is a pleasure to have you all with us. Let me start by asking how this film came about. How did you get intrigued by this particular story? And I'd like to open it up to any of you to answer.
Okay, maybe I will start because it happened such a way that I started this story. I mean, as I was doing research, I'm interested in history. I do most of my films that I do are related to history. I came across an interview with a Ravensbruck survivor, a Polish lady, who in this interview mentioned just one sentence. And in this sentence, she said that there was such Ausverein, guard, Langerfeld, and she was arrested after the war. And our colleagues from Krakow helped to her escape from the prison. So obviously it was shock for me to hear such a story. And then I started to investigate. I contacted this lady. She confirmed that. I still kind of didn't believe. So I did a little research, contacted some other Ravensbruck survivors in Poland, and all of them confirmed that. So that was like the moment of the beginning. And I contacted Gerburg, whom I knew already. I've seen her film, her previous film, and we decided to do this story together since it was involving both sides, Poland and Germany. And we thought that would be convenient to work together. And this worked out that way, that we started this film.
Mm. What did you think, Ms. Rohde-Dahl, when you got this phone call? What did you think about this story?
Yeah, in the first, I didn't believe it as well. I couldn't believe it really. I went into internet and checked Johanna Langerfeld, and there was written another story. And I asked Władek, is this really true? And are you sure about? And but then he came with the other women who confirmed it, and yeah, so I started to believe it. But yeah, it was untold in Germany. It was unknown in Germany and in Poland as well.
It seems that this story was not known much of anywhere except for by a few people. Why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, it all was done in secret. You know, it all happened shortly after the war in 1946, and the Polish ladies who were involved in all this thing, they were aware that simply that it's dangerous for them to uncover this story. And well, she stayed in Poland. We have to remember that after escape from prison, Langerfeld stayed in Poland for almost 12 years. So uncovering this would endanger both the Langerfeld and those who were involved in helping her escape. So it was secrecy. We learn also later that this close circle, 5 women who were involved in this, they vowed the secrecy. So it was like an oath not to tell anybody. And so it was kept like that for many, many years. I think it came out late in 90s, maybe they started to talk more about it.
It's hard to keep a secret like that. It's very, very difficult. Do you know anything about the lengths they went to keep it a secret? I mean, how did they manage to keep it a secret?
Well, there was very, as we were told, there were only 5 ladies involved in this. So it was a small circle. And since they made a vow not to share it with anybody, you know, and they all were involved in underground, in the resistance during the war. So and they were in scouting and all that. So they were trained in secrecy. They were like professional conspirators, you know. So I think that helped to keep it secret until, I guess, most of them died. So then the other learned also and started to share this story.
Do you have any indication that these 5 women were friendly with each other, unconnected to this story or this situation with Langerfeld?
I'm not quite, I don't quite understand this.
Were they friends with each other? Did they do anything else together?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, of course. They were friends. They were very close. They all of them lived in Krakow. And there was a strong group of Ravensbruck survivors there. It was called, there were several Ravensbruck clubs, in which there were Ravensbruck survivors organized. They had meetings, they organized things. At some point, they even kept running the cafe in Krakow. And there were all kinds of women involved in that, but they were very, very close together. They were, you know, they spent 5 years in concentration camp together, and they had a lot of chances to work together. So it was natural for them.
Do you know what the reaction has been among other Ravensbruck survivors once the story came out about what these 5 women had done? How did the other survivors feel about this? Do you know?
Well, as we were speaking with those survivors who were alive as we were making film, most of them were speaking very positively about Langerfeld. So all of them agreed with this decision to help her escape. So yeah.
But the women spoke already a little bit earlier about this. At least 2 of them, Mrs. Baranowski and Mrs. Winska, in an interview with Loretta Waltz, and they mentioned, and even they emphasized that this is a very rare story or something like this, and spoke about that a Nazi perpetrator were saved by Polish women, and Langerfeld were saved by them, and it was okay for them. And we asked Loretta Waltz, because that's a big story, and why didn't she pick it up? But she was interviewing these women. She made about 200 interviews with survivors of Ravensbruck, and she was more focused on their experience in the concentration camps themselves. And so she sort of ignored it. And maybe it was also a time where we weren't so keen about stories of perpetrators, but much more interested in the stories of the victims. Even there were an exposition in Ravensbruck in 10 years, now yet maybe I started, Mr. Schwartz, when did it start, the exposition in Ravensbruck?
Our first exhibition about concentration camp guards in Ravensbruck, that was in 2004. So in October 2004, the exposition was opened, but we started to work on the topic a bit earlier, of course.
Yeah, but you had a special exposition about the perpetrators, about the guards.
Yes, I will show you the book so you have an image. Wait.
Mm-hmm. And I heard that in the beginning of this exposition, this was, I mean, 15 years ago or something, that there were also people refusing it, especially the prisoners, the former prisoners, saying, yeah, what about, why are you interested in them and not in us? Something like this. Maybe Mr. Schwartz can
Yes.
have something a little bit more correctly.
Yes, I like to do it. So I just show you the book that's from our exhibition. That is the catalog from the exhibition. And we opened it in 2004, and it took us a very long time. We started in April 2003 to work on this topic. And first of all the survivor organizations were against us. They didn't want us to treat this topic, as well as the director of the foundation of Brandenburg Memorials. But more and more we convinced them, and we also integrated the survivors in our work. So I made interviews with them about female SS guards, and more they understood that the experience in the concentration camp is not understandable without the perpetrators. I mean, a concentration camp doesn't work without the perpetrators. So more and more they understood that that is our topic, and that this is very important also for young people to understand what happened in concentration camps. And then when we opened the exhibition, we had a lot of visitors who wanted to know more about the topic, and it was a great success, the exhibition.
What do you think the resistance was initially to learning stories about the perpetrators?
The reason why especially survivor organizations didn't want us to treat the topic was that they thought, or they were afraid, that we make these perpetrators understandable, that we want to understand them, and that means to understand. They were afraid that understanding means also justify them, what they did. And that wasn't our the reason why we wanted to treat this topic. But people thought, these organizations, they thought this. And we had a lot of work to do to convince them that that was not our approach. We wanted to understand, of course, why they did these crimes and why they went there in the concentration camp, why they became a female SS guard. We wanted to explain it, but we didn't want to excuse them. And that was took a lot of time to convince everybody, but we succeed. And there was also the Central Committee of Jews in Germany, that's Zentralrat der Juden, and also the Zentralrat Deutscher Sinti und Roma. That means the organization of the Rome. who also were victims of a genocide, and they made a small committee to help us to develop the exhibition, and they helped us, and yes, we agreed very soon that it is a very important topic, and we made also one room only about the crimes of the female SS guards, and that was something they supported very much.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I can add on this
please.
subject, in Poland, we also faced some difficulties with our film. When we approached the Auschwitz Museum, because Langerfeld spent a few months in Auschwitz, she organized the female camp in Auschwitz. When we approached the Auschwitz Museum, they were afraid to work with us. They didn't know what we want to achieve. What is the direction of this film? Why to do the film about the guard, the German guard? So we had to meet actually with Gerburg, meet with the director of the museum and talk and explain and then afterwards to break the ice, and they finally agreed. They let us film in the museum.
I am fascinated by the reactions that people have now about the film, both in Germany and in Poland. What has the reaction been in Germany?
Yeah, may I just continue the question of the topic of the last, because
Sure.
I wanted to speak about that. The director of the museum in Auschwitz asked the first question: why don't you make a film about 6 million victims, but only a film about one perpetrator, a German perpetrator? So that was his question. It was a summary of his whole suspect. Yeah, and in Germany, I had a lot of screenings with discussion. Meanwhile, live also, and it was always, nobody said really that we wanted to excuse Langerfeld. They all appreciated that we had an ambivalence, a balance between the Polish view, or the view of the Polish women, and why they wanted to save her, and the other side, what she really did to others, and especially to Jew women. And they really appreciated it. Yeah, they were impressed, and we had very good talks about it after the film.
It fascinates me to try to understand the human condition, that someone who was an SS guard can be described as kind. And that's a particular word that several of these women used to describe her, but yet she committed horrible crimes at the same time. How does one person go from being doing so much evil and at the same or at another time show kindness? That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think that it's general like this, obviously. We know this from other, Hess, for example, director of Auschwitz, and he was a really nice father, careful father. His family lived in the same place. He had a villa in the same place, just separated with a wall. And in the morning, he opened the door to the wall and went from his home to the camp.
Right. It's difficult to conceive.
I think that we have to learn. We can't recognize people like this as demons, or they are just normal people. But normal people can become demons.
Right. Right. Was the reaction different in Poland at all?
No, I think people reacted in similar way. Of course, the film has this investigative layer. I would say this sensational story of the escape, and that's something that first attracts people. But then come the other question: how it was possible. And that's what we wanted as we were doing this film. We wanted people to ask more questions about how it was possible, and we were interested in trying to understand the mechanisms of the system, how it was possible that so-called normal, ordinary people become a part of this murderous machine. And I think Langerfeld is good example of that normal, ordinary people, when they become attracted to evil, because evil can be attractive, when they become attracted to evil, when they follow this, they can become the part of the system. So I think this is the most important reflection in probably in this film, trying to understand how it worked.
And the more I study of this period in history and the more I learn, sometimes I feel the less I understand, because that's an extremely difficult question to answer. How does someone get attracted and do things that are so awful? You know, it's very, very difficult to understand. And I came away from watching your film with all kinds of questions. And I think that's a very normal reaction and sparks a great deal of discussion. Is that what you wanted for your film when you decided to make it?
Yeah, definitely. We wanted to invite people to ask questions about. Yeah, we didn't want to give answers. We wanted to open a room for questions, because people have to. We don't have an answer, and I think nobody can have a general answer for this question. Everybody has to find his private, his personal answer, how it can happen, how it could have happened, and how it happens also in everyone's small room, in small situations. That you follow, for example, a conviction, that you are convinced of something, and you know now how it is, and you think you know the truth, and there comes something which which speaks against it, and you reject it. You tend to not to hear it, because you want to stay with your truth, and that's the beginning.
So you used a great deal of archival footage and photographs to create the film. Where did you get most of those materials?
Well, some of the material we got from archives which are available, for example, in Poland, some from Auschwitz Museum, some archives from Ravensbruck Museum as well, also from Holocaust Memorial Museum. But probably the best archives that we got, they were private archives, and Gerburg got in contact with people who shared their archives, so she can say a few things about that.
Yeah, that was really very, very lucky, because the memorial told me that there's a daughter of a guard. She lives here in Germany, North Germany, even in my hometown in Bremen. And I visited her. First of all, she didn't want to make an interview, but I could convince her. And then it came out that her mother, as a guard, was a friend, a very close friend, even the closest friend of Langerfeld. And then that's because she even had photos. It was unbelievable. And a lot of them, yeah. Yeah, that was luck also, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that was first time when we saw how actually Langerfeld looked like.
Yeah.
Because before that, we had no idea. And there was only one photo from SS album of Ravensbruck camp, this photograph from the visit of Reichsführer Himmler,
Right.
when she, and on this photograph, she was a little figure, so you couldn't see her face or anything. But Frau Bracken, she showed the private photos where we could see how Langerfeld looked like, her son and other people. So that was first time when she was really revealed to public.
It really is remarkable that you were able to find that. Really, really remarkable. Do you have any sense of why she stayed in Poland for so long and why she didn't go to Germany earlier?
Yeah, I think she was still afraid that she would be accused and had to meet a trial. And then maybe also there was, I think, no possibility to transfer from Poland, like because she was not registered. She was registered only maybe in the last 4 years. I suppose in the last 4 years, because we know this of the diary of Mrs. Neumann, Buber Neumann, that she tried also to get in contact with her sister and her son, and they wrote letters, but we don't have these letters.
Right.
And then there were another politic, Władek, could you, because Gomulka came and made it possible that people could transfer from, or German people could transfer from Poland to Germany or something like this.
Yeah, in 1956,
yeah,
there were some changes in Poland, in communist country and in communist authorities. We know it's the time after Stalin's death, and so there were some changes. There was more freedom, and then the Władysław Gomułka, the ruler of the Communist Party in Poland, he decided that Germans who were left after the war in Poland and want to go back to Germany, they can go, and so that was the occasion for Langerfeld to go back to Germany from Poland, and as we were told, this was also done in secrecy. This is sort of. So
secrecy, because I really tried to find her name on a list somewhere. I really did a lot of researches, and I with her family name or with her native name, and she didn't appear anywhere anyway. And all these transfers during that time in 56, 57, she came in 57. There was no name. She wasn't mentioned there.
And what about her family in Germany? Were they cooperative at all with you?
Mr. Schwartz did the first interview with the family.
Right.
Mr. Schwartz, could you tell about?
Yes, I talked in 2004, just after we opened the exhibition. It wasn't possible before. I talked with the daughter-in-law and the great son of Johanna Langerfeld in Augsburg. I made a long interview with them. and it was a wonderful interview. The daughter-in-law was very open to me. She talked very openly and told all her memories. But the great son, he was a bit skeptic of me. And he forbade his mother after the interview to stay in contact with me. He didn't want it anymore. He was a bit strange. He has some visions. He's afraid of things, and he doesn't want to have any contact with me anymore. Yes, I was trying to get the contact with Gerburg Rohde-Dahl for the film, but it wasn't possible. But also with Johanna Braken, I already did an interview for the exhibition, and we also already talked about where Johanna Langerfeld lived, and that she was close to her room in the SS colony in Ravensbruck. So I knew that she knew the Johanna Langerfeld very well, and that is why I gave Gerburg Rohde-Dahl also the contact with her. So that was this was very successful, this connection. But the daughter-in-law of Johanna Langerfeld, she was very nice to me. I think that she would love to talk with me once more, but the great son, he was able to cut this connection. I don't know why he wanted to. I mean, he also, his father died in a car crash. So that is something that he never really understood in his life. And that's why he doesn't want to have anything from the past once more in his life. I think it's very complicated with him.
All right.
You told me also, Mr. Schwartz, that also the stepmother didn't want to have this published. She said several times, I never want to have this published. I don't want to be recognized as daughter-in-law of the son of a perpetrator, of a Nazi perpetrator.
Mm.
They were very, very afraid that they might be recognized and would lose their position in their town, and that's the reason. And I had also telephone calls with them, and they were also open. Also the son, the grandson of Langerfeld. But oh, my light, no, it's okay. But but he stopped in the moment when I wanted to convince him to work with us in the film. He was completely against it and very, very strict at it. And in the end, he also shut down and didn't want to talk with me anymore.
I am struck by the fact that there are so few stories, at least that we're aware of in America, about women during this time period. Most of the stories we're familiar with are stories of men.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find the fact that this was the story of a woman make it particularly interesting?
Mm.
Yes, can I say something about Johanna Langerfeld?
Sure.
Yeah, because that's a very good question you just asked me, because a while ago Gerburg Rohde-Dahl compared Johanna Langerfeld to Rudolf Höss. And I think there's a very great difference between these two persons, because Johanna Langerfeld, she was aware that she is a woman, and that was something very special in the SS system. She was a long time the only supervisor of a camp as a woman. So Ravensbruck was the only women's concentration camp for a long time. And then in March 42, the SS leaders decided that they need more concentration camps for women, because there was so much resistance, especially in Poland, that a lot of women were arrested and they had to be somewhere. So they opened the second female concentration camp in Auschwitz. And who would be the best one to open a new female concentration camp as the only supervisor of a female concentration camp at the moment? That was Johanna Langerfeld. Of course, she must open the second women's concentration camp in Auschwitz. And she was supported a long time by Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler always said, a woman concentration camp has to be ruled by a woman. And she was convinced that she as a woman has a special way to lead a women's concentration camp. And that is why Heinrich Himmler supported her. And she was also convinced that, for example, a man is not allowed to enter a women's concentration camp. And she had a lot of struggle with the leaders, SS leaders in Ravensbruck and in Auschwitz, especially with Rudolf Höss. And in Auschwitz, they had so much struggle about responsibilities, who has the right to rule a women's concentration camp. Rudolf Höss wanted to make a man the camp leader of the women's concentration camp, and Langerfeld was against it. They had a lot of struggle, and that is why she was sent back to Ravensbrück for a while. But in Ravensbrück, there were the same problems with the male SS leaders. They have changed in the meantime. There was Suren now, the camp leader, and they had the same problems. And that is why at the end, she failed, and she quit the concentration camp in April 43. So, but I think that Langerfeld has a very different approach to how to rule a concentration camp. She was very convinced that the Polish community is very important to organize the camp administration. She had a lot of Polish female guards, you would say as capos, but in a women concentration camp, they were called, they had some other names. They had Anweisungshäftling, and they were like heads of work details. And she used them a lot in the camp administration. That was something very special with Johanna Langerfeld, because she knew that the Polish community was the biggest in Ravensbrück, and she couldn't rule the camp without them. She was very convinced about this. And the SS, the male SS leaders, they thought, oh, this is perhaps dangerous. She gives too much power to these Polish prisoners. We have to change it. And that's also the reason why she had to leave the concentration camp at the end, because the male superiors, they were afraid of her. They also were afraid that she has too much power, because she had a good relationship to all these female capos. So she had much power in the camp, and the male superiors, they thought, oh, we don't have enough power in this camp. We have to change positions here. And that is why at the end, when Heinrich Himmler didn't support Langerfeld anymore, because he had other problems in the Nazi state, then that was the moment where they could get rid of her. But at the beginning, she was supported by Heinrich Himmler for a long time.
And there's also a scene which she described in her report for the Americans when she was in prison in the Garmisch-Partenkirchen, in the first prison camp with the American. And in the end, in December of 46, she wrote a report, a long, very, very differentiated report, and there she described a scene with dialogues. And she describes that people from the Nazis, the superiors, came to visit the camp to control this, how it works. And she had all her prisoners in the middle of the place standing there. And then one of these superiors came to her, and then she said, really like a dialogue, oh, Mrs. Guard, Oberaufseherin, how can you manage that there's no yelling, no commander, and who makes the command here, and everything is so quiet, and how does it work? And she says, well, this is a female way of dealing with it. We don't yell, we do it silently, and everything works perfectly. And that's how we as women work like this. But it is, yeah. I mean, the situation was the same for the prisoner.
Right. Very.
Yes, and what is very can I just add one sentence?
Yeah.
Sure.
And what is very important is that not every prisoner was treated the same way. The Jewish prisoners in Ravensbruck, they always had a separate barrack, and they were separated from the other prisoners, and they always got a special treatment, and they get special punishment. Also, when the German army failed at the front, the Jewish prisoners get a punishment for that, because the Jews were the reason why the German army lost. That was the anti-Semitic thought of the camp authorities. And Johanna Langerfeld always participated in these punishment of the Jewish prisoners. And Johanna Langerfeld also organized the selections for the murder campaign 14F13 in February 42, just before she was transferred to Auschwitz. And also in Auschwitz, she organized selections in the camp, and especially in the Jewish barracks. So what concerns the Holocaust, she was a part of it, but she treated German, Austrian, and Polish prisoners better. So this is very important to know, that not all the prisoners are equal, that the prisoners were treated differently.
Sinti,
I think here we
horrible scenes or horrible witnesses of Sinti, how they were tortured there.
Yeah, I think here we also have to mention this fact, to emphasize this fact, what Dr. Schwartz already mentioned, that the Jewish prisoners were separated and the other prisoners didn't have contact with them.
Mm.
So other prisoners also had no knowledge of Langerfeld involvement in treating Jewish prisoners. So and really the ladies that we spoke to as we were working on a film, they learned about it. So I think it's mentioned in the film. One of the ladies says, I just recently learned that she was anti-Semite. So,
right.
So there is a question how they would treat her, how they would react if they knew everything about her, if they knew also this dark side of Langerfeld, because their view of reality and Langerfeld was limited there in the camp. They were closed in a certain area. They could see certain things. They only met her when she came to them, and so they didn't have the full knowledge of what was going around and who really Langerfeld was. But all the good that they received from her was for them enough to see her differently than other guards. Yes. And I think one of the ladies says about it that there are different levels of evil there, and on this scale, she was like the best for them. That's why they thought good about her and decided that she cannot die, that they need to help her.
Mm-hmm.
So I was struck by that, about the different levels of evil, that there's greater evil and lesser evil. It's a very interesting concept, and raises a lot of questions morally about that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, that does come through directly in the film, and it's fascinating to me. Really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yes, and I think can I just add one sentence?
Yes.
That there are different scales of evil. That is something very important to the survivors. You can find this in a lot of survivors' testimonies. And the reason is that the survivors underline that perpetrators had a scope of action, that they could behave differently. So just after the war, a lot of Germans said we were forced to do this. We couldn't do other. And that is why the survivors underline that they could act differently, that there were different possibilities to act in the camp, that there was no female SS guard was forced to hit the prisoners. That's something that they did, that they decided themselves, that they can't rule a concentration camp without hitting, but they were not forced. In contrary, the female SS guards had to sign a document that they don't hit prisoners when they started with their job. And in my book, I interpret this document as the camp rulers, the SS, they didn't want to have the responsibility for the violence. They wanted to give the responsibility to the female SS guards.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I also saw that about how they had rules that said they could not hit prisoners, but yet they did it anyway.
And why, it's also something else, why they risked their life to save Langerfeld after the war, which they just got again, that Langerfeld gave them a sort of hope. And I think if you are in a concentration camp, you need some hope somewhere to survive. And the way Langerfeld dealt and behaved, she gave them a tiny part of hope. Yeah, and that
it's fascinating. I mean, I certainly don't know much about the Polish criminal system, but I have to assume that these 5 women really did risk their lives, that their punishment would have been extraordinarily severe if they had been caught.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so. That they were endangering their own life to save the SS woman, which is also another paradox in this situation. But well, when we judge history, we have to know the details. We have to know the circumstances of the time. And that was also very special time in Poland when communist rule came, and I guess most of those ladies did not identify with those new authorities. Lots of them were involved in anti-communist movements as well. So it was lot of mess in that time, and in this sort of gray area, they were able to find a way to persuade guards of the Polish prison to help to release this German woman. But we have to mention that it is a very unique story. I think it is the only documented case when prisoners of the concentration camp saved the commandant of that camp from death sentence, because that was what would actually happen to Langerfeld. I think that her colleagues like Mandel, she was sentenced to death, right, and executed in 47 or beginning of 48, I think.
And no one tried to save her, apparently.
No. And
yeah, that's the difference. Yeah, she was called a beast. She was really really sarcastic and brutal. And Langerfeld was sort of correct. She was a correct Nazi, I can say.
Right.
No,
right.
but I think if we want to understand why these women they took their own life in danger with supporting Johanna Langerfeld. Why did they do this? I think the reason is to find in the concentration camp, and also in the way how Johanna Langerfeld behaved towards the prisoners from the Polish nation. And I think her approach in general was the camp had a panel system. So if somebody did something wrong, didn't work fast enough or so, they could be punished in the camp. There was a special punishment block. It was very difficult to survive there because there was a cell building. You get punishments like nothing to eat for weeks, nothing to drink for weeks. So all these punishments in the camp, they were really, most of the prisoners died. So you should, in a concentration camp, you should avoid to be punished anyway. So, and most of the SS leaders, they just punished the prisoners. They didn't care if somebody was announced for crime. They made always the most severe punishments. But Johanna Langerfeld was different. She thought that this punishment system was very important, and she wanted to know the truth. So she made interrogations. She made a lot of interrogations with the prisoners, and she wanted to convince the prisoners not to behave like this anymore, and she wanted to know the truth. And sometimes there was a prisoner accused, but actually another prisoner did the crime. So it was always a question of surviving in the camp. And in this way, she gave the life to a lot of prisoners who thought they will die, but she, with her interrogations, she saved their life. And that is the reason why prisoners after the war were said, I couldn't have survived the camp without her. So that is why I want to help her now to survive as well. Mm-hmm. And this is not, I mean, in the way they did it for Johanna Langerfeld, perhaps this very, to a certain degree, special, but it's not at all the only case. We have a lot of survivors from camps who helped SS men and women after the war in trials, when they helped them as a witness of the defense. They were very often witness of defense prisoners who have an SS man or an SS woman who they said after the war, they helped me to survive. And that is also the reason is the big power gap in the concentration camp between SS and prisoners. The SS always had the possibility to, yes, help single persons to survive.
Yeah, one example is, for example, the mother of Mrs. Bracken, because she also had a trial, and some prisoner, I don't know the name, you may know them. Know it, the name of the
Nanda
prisoner.
Herbermann. Nanda Herbermann.
Exactly. Yeah.
She was
for her, and so she was. She was released. she could leave the prison, but in my interpretation, I found this a little bit in the letter the prisoner, the ladies, the Polish ladies, wrote to the German authorities to speak for Langerfeld, and I think. This is my personal interpretation, but I think the Nazis worked also to break the humanity, the dignity of the prisoners, and I think the Polish women also wanted to show and to that people see, that Germans see, you didn't succeed. We still kept our humanity. And that's why we are speaking for Mrs. Langerfeld. Yeah,
there was
part of the reasons, many reasons, I think.
There was a line in the film where the comment was made, even a German like her deserves justice. Exactly. And I think that says a great deal about the person saying those words.
Yeah.
it says that the person who believes in the concept of justice maintains their dignity and their humanity by saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, the film talks about woman war from the woman's perspective. Yeah, and we most of our discussion we focus on Langerfeld and other guards, but I think for us as authors, the greatest experience was to meet those Ravensbruck survivors, those ladies.
Yeah.
And to learn from them how it was, what they went through, and how in all those circumstances they were able to keep their humanity, to keep their sense of justice, you know, and that was part of their decision as well. So there is a lot of to talk about how their life in camp look like, what they went through, how they suffer, and most of that we know from Auschwitz and from other concentration camp, but also how they were organized, how they kept sort of resistance within the camp, and resist all this inhumanity to protect their own humanity, their sense of justice, and to keep themselves
Own dignity.
yeah, their own dignity, human dignity. That's right.
Well, I want to thank you all for being here and agreeing to discuss this film with us. If your goal was to raise a lot of questions and spark discussion, then I think you have succeeded beautifully. This is a fascinating story that I think is going to be really interesting to all of the festival goers. And I think it raises a lot of very important and interesting questions. So thank you all for this discussion. I'm very grateful that you gave us your time, and I look forward to sharing this film with the rest of our festival audience.